Hi, this is Rochelle, and I'm here to talk to you about transitive verbs, verbs that we do to another person or another person does to us. Today, what we're going to start talking about is the conjunct endings for these verbs. I know that it can be intimidating to learners, but hopefully we'll walk through it and you might be able to find a few conjugations to start your learning with and then expand out from there. These conjugations are very common, but a lot of learners sort of avoid learning them or delay learning them because they can be a bit intimidating. These are really common because they are both the B form. A lot of teachers will call them B form or C form. And these endings are used with both of those, and they give a huge amount of nuance, detail, clarity in your speaking once you get them. Today, I'm going to talk about these conjugations. And these conjugations do not include the we's and us's. I'll do a separate video for those because there's some really interesting things happening in there and some interesting diversity. So today we're going to focus on interactions between me and you and third person and that other person. So that's what we're going to focus on, and we'll go through them in sets. One thing to look for is that the sound that comes right after the verb in these conjugations can give you a sense of what's happening right off the bat. And so there's sort of three sounds that we'll focus on today. The a, which tells you that there's action going outward, either from me or you to a third person or third person to a fourth person. There's also it, which is action that's coming in towards me, not you, the person I'm talking to. It's just coming into me and I'm telling you about it. And then our in, which is our action that's happening to the person that I'm talking to. So you can see here we have in, and I. And so even if you don't have all the conjugations down, you might be able to look at or hear the sound right after the verb to get a sense of what's happening. So the first set I wanted to talk about is this pattern that I see, where it's the sound that tells us about who the action is happening to. So here it's action happening to me, and here it's action happening to you, the person I'm talking to. And then that is followed by the VAI conjugation, which you may remember from earlier in your learning, for the person who's acting. So iyan or iyin is you acting on me, when you are acting on me. And so iyeg, use. Yeg from your VAIs, you might remember, was what we used to say use. And now yous are acting on me. Id, he or she is acting on me. And iwad, they are acting on me. And then here we have in, so the action is happening to you, the person that I'm talking to. And on, in our VAIs, it often looked like yawn, but it's on, as we know from our VAIs that ended with M. So in on is when I act on you. I am intentionally using a verb that has an ZHN. This is a pattern where when the conjugation starts with an I, that means action towards me. The N shows up as a ZH. And so I'm using a verb that does this intentionally just to get you comfortable with the idea. In other verbs, it won't be changing necessarily. So this is the first set. Mijian, when you give it to me. Mijieg, when yous give it to me. Mijid, when he or she gives it to me. Mijiwad, when they give it to me. And then minanan, when I give it to you. And so this is the first set, and I should have said this earlier, but with conjunct endings, all the information about who's involved in the interaction comes after the verb. In our independent form, we had a little bit before the verb and a little bit after, but for these, all the information comes after the verb. So, little exception to give you. For the plural, I give it to yous, plural, while it still has the in, the plural is aguk. So minaguk, which is a little bit funny sounding, I thought, when I was first learning it. But that actually helped me to remember it more easily. So inaguk is the conjugation. Some people will have ininaguk, but that is one that doesn't fit with the pattern that we've discussed. So here's what we have done so far. This is me, the speaker. I mean, whatever you want to call it. Here's you, the person I'm talking to, Geen. And then here's our third person and our third person plural. So I've put the singulars at the top and the plurals at the bottom. And these are the conjugations. So the verb goes ahead of the conjugation. And I always love using my hands as a learning aid. So when I give it to you, maybe we should pick a different verb. So maybe I see you. Wabaminan, you see me. Wabiyan. Wabaminan, wabamiyan. Wabamiyin, depending on how you write and pronounce that. And then if third person is acting on me, wabamid, or they are acting on me, wabamiwad. And so this is the first set, and if this is the most you can take on right now, that's amazing. We're going to take a second and practice them. So here are some conjugated verbs in the with conjunct endings, and your task is to figure out what they mean. So which direction the action is going and who's involved. And you can pause here to work on that. So our first verb, we look at it, and the verb is biskabiginona or biskabiginoj. And so we look at the conjugation. Again, it comes after the verb. So we see it's action towards me by you. That you call me back. So now we look at our verb. I, meaning action towards me, and the action is being done by yeg, use. So that you all give it back to me. So here, action towards me by third person, that he calls me back. Here we have remembers the verb, and we see here it's action on me. So I'm the one being remembered, and wad, they are the ones doing it, that they remember me. So now we have wabam as our verb, and we see in, action towards you, and then on, that's being done by me. So that I see you. And then finally, our little exception, Biska big and no neguk, that I call yous back. So this is the first set. And if at this point, that's as much as you can take in, great, congratulations. It's a good step in learning these. I'm going to move now on to the second set. So this second set is the ones that are kind of new. In the first set, we were relying on information we already knew and just sort of thinking about what it means in a VTA conjunct conjugation. So the new ones are ones we haven't seen before, so we're going to have to sort of remember them. Ug, ag, ug is action from me to third person. And so we know that this is kind of outward action, and I don't know why, but the G helps us to know which one. So it's action from me to him or her. And then ud, the second one here, is action from you to third person, you to him or her, ween to we. And so these are two that we just have to learn. Meenug, meenut. And again, I'm always using my hand to help my brain absorb the information. When we're doing these, we can also do the plurals. So rather than just to third person, we can say to them, to third person plural, weenawa. And what I think of is when we're taking it from ween to weenawa, we're adding this wa to our conjugations. So meenugwa comes from meenug. So meenug is I to her or him. Meenugwa is changing that third person to a plural third person, from he or she to them in English. So meenud, you to him or her. Meenadwa, you to them. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. We've seen wa for third person plural a few places, including in its sort of name. So there's one last one, and it is ik. Some people write it IG. Both are fantastic. Meenik is he to you. Him or her or ween, the third person singular, to you, the person I'm talking to. Meenik. And I have this little gremlin here. We'll talk about him in a minute, why I have that. But if we look to the plural, with they to you, we're again just adding the wa to take the third person from singular to plural. So meenik is he or she to you. Meenikwa, they to you. So gremlins is not a real linguistic term. It's just a way I think of verbs and conjugations that at first seem like one thing, but then as you get to learn about them more, you realize there's more going on. And sometimes the negative, sometimes the way they interact with certain verbs helps us to understand what is sort of underneath or behind what we see at first. And so it made me think of gremlins, because you have to add certain things or change the conditions to really understand what you're looking at. It's not going to be interesting to everyone, but if it is interesting to you, take a minute, you can look at sort of the way I'm thinking about it as an idea and how it interacts with our learning. The verbs we're looking at in this second set, or not the verbs, sorry, the conjugations, ug, I to him or her, agwa, I to them, ud, you to him or her, adwa, you to them, ik, he or she to you, and ikwa, them to you. So here's now what we've looked at. We're adding our ug and ud and ik to our little chart. So we're going to work on the pluralizing here. So here are our examples. You can pause if you want to work on them. So for our first one, we're going to take our minug, and then to pluralize it to be when I give it to them, we're adding the wa. Minad becomes minadwa. Minik becomes minikwa. Wapamud becomes wapamadwa. Wapamik becomes wapamikwa. One thing I will mention, if you add ug to verbs like verbs that end with a W, you're going to have wug. And that was one thing that I started to pick up on first, was not assuming that every WAG is a VAI verb. You have to keep in mind it could be a VTA verb with a me to him or her ending on it. So that was very helpful because I had been misunderstanding other things before, assuming that the WAG was a VAI. So we've looked at 12 ways already to conjugate the conjunct endings. So the last ones we're going to talk about today are our third person to our fourth person. So this is when someone is doing something to someone else. So I'm not involved, you, the person I'm talking to, is not involved. It's between that person and the other person. And this is really common in stories. It's also called the obviate. If you know the independent form, what you're going to do here is replace the N that you used in conjugating 3 to 4 in the independent form. You're going to replace it with a D. Becomes minad. And some people may have an O at the beginning of the independent form. So that doesn't happen here. All of the information comes after the verb. So when he gives it to that other person, minad. And you want to make sure that you keep your vowel length right, because you don't want it to sound like minad, which we just learned is you to him or her. This is minad, where third person is giving it to fourth person. And so for the plural, we see our same thing happening. The wa here is pluralizing the third person. So if it's they are giving it to another person or others, we're having min wad, min wad. And really what's happening is this N is becoming a D. So if you have your independent forms, it's not too tricky. In our independent form, we had minikun, and in the conjunct form, we have minagut. And the O is shortening, so we have Minagut, when that other person gives it to him or her, or if the him or her is pluralized, then we add the wa, Miniguwad. So we have when the other person gives it to them, plural, Miniguwad. Here are the conjugations that we looked at. There's quite a few. Again, this might take a while to get down. There may be some that you become comfortable with really quickly, and others that, you know, are harder to get into your brain. That's totally normal. Take as much as you can and then leave the rest for another day. So for a lot of people, starting with the singulars is probably the easiest option. So this is a chart for the singular versions, and you can write it down, you can put it on your wall, you can write it on your hand and walk around with it all day. However it's useful to you is great, but these are the singular options, and you want to remember these arrows are the direction of the action, and you want to put the verb ahead of the conjugation. So all of these, you can insert whatever VTA verb you want, and practice. And we'll keep moving our knowledge of these transitive verbs, the verbs that happen between people. We'll keep moving our knowledge on that along. Miigwech.